Delphi Station. This is Captain Zagram of shadowy movement along the backdrop of stars, carrying Her Holiness, Listener Melbras, reporting that we have successfully translated to sublight. Welcome, Captain. Data packet for parking corners have been transmitted. We'll be over soon to pick up Her Holiness, responded the friendly voice of a station operator. To Zigram's surprise, it took 4 milliseconds for them to receive the coordinates. Strange for the race with the greatest prediction power to wait until after the recipient had arrived, before sending the data packet. He shrugged. Such musings were above his station. Shortly after they stopped in their allotted section of space around the station, a small vessel docked with them. The technology employed by the humans once again surprised Zigram. Instead of predicting what kind of tech they would need to successfully interface the two species' airlocks, the humans had simply extended the tube from their shuttle to Zigram's ship, ensuring it was sealed well against its hull and pressurized it. For one, Zigram was happy that protocol demanded him to stay aboard the ship, in case the host required it to be moved. He did not envy Melbras's trip between ships, the only thing separating her from the void being a semi-transparent plastic sheet tube. While he foretold that he would survive the experience, the thought of it still frightened him. Melbras put on a brave face as she leapt from the comfortable gravity of the ship, through the weightlessness-inducing tube, all the way to the shuttle sent to pick her up. She wasn't sure what kind of game the human were playing here. Were they forcing her to humiliate herself by testing her with peril, to see if she would crack? Or were they declaring that a race as weak as hers had no right to a more lavish form of transportation? She pushed these thoughts to the back of her mind as she reached the airlock of the human shuttle. As the outer door closed and the oxygen cycled back in, she remembered her mission here. First was to greet the humans, as this was the first meeting between their two civilizations since the end of the war. Second of all was to figure out how the humans surpassed her people. By the orrery, their FEL tech wasn't even a decade old. As the inner door opened, what she saw almost made her heart stop. 1 houseman and 2 guards, all of them with a weapon on their hips. She briefly considered that they were here to assassinate her, and that this whole trip had been a lie. But then she remembered that the orrery and the choir both agreed she would be safe this trip. She had nothing to worry about, as usual, and was happy to note that the shuttle had started moving towards the station. Hoping the humans didn't notice her fear, she stepped forward. Greetings. I'm the listener Melbras. Take me to your leader. Why this elicited a chuckle from everyone aboard was a mystery to her. I apologize, was there a translation error? No, listener, there wasn't. It's what we always said that the first alien we saw would say that. She nodded. It made sense, given how good their predictions must be. If only she knew how they made them. And how long ago was this prophecy recorded? The soldiers looked at each other for a second, before one of them pulled some device from his pocket and tapped it a few times. Says here it was already a popular saying by the 1960s, about 160 rotations of the planet around the sun ago. Melbras almost voided her bows. After some mental mathematics, she realized this was well over a galactic century old. Now she would step aboard this shuttle and say those exact words. She needed to be careful if she was to ingratiate herself with their predictors and learn how to bring their secrets to her people. A few minutes later, they were docking with the station, allegedly named after one of the humans' greatest oracles. And what a station it was. Bigger than any city back on Zibelsha, and absolutely flooded with people. As soon as she stepped out of the shuttle, she was greeted by a host of human soldiers, each pointing a device at her, and for a moment she was rooted in place by a mixture of worry and horror. Then the clicking and the flashing started. The devices were like a wall of what the humans called flashbangs, albeit much milder, and the clicking was akin to the flechette weapons used in ritual duels. But instead of being riddled with the projectiles the humans used in war, she was instead treated to a light show, albeit one that slightly hurt as she stared at it. Her 2 escorts hurried her into the awaiting vehicle, and they sewed off as soon as the door was closed. Apologies, listener. We should have warned you about the paparazzi. She simply nodded, unsure of what to make of it. She connected her pad to the station network and looked up the term her escort had used. Then her eye nearly leapt out of its socket. Apparently the humans, with all their power, didn't use their precognition on matters other than war. While the general public had known she would arrive today, they didn't know when or where. Apparently there had even been a contest, where people paid money to predict where and when she would arrive from, with the winner taking everyone else's money. While such methods were occasionally used to help civilian children develop their abilities, the fact that adults were doing this seemed off to her. Surely it must be some kind of remedial class for late bloomers, she thought. After a short drive, they arrived at the government building in charge of the station's bureaucracy. She was escorted through more flashes, and they brought her to a waiting area, where an attendant brought her a tray of drinks, Greetings, listener. I brought you a selection of drinks, all clear for your medical staff. Would you care for water, tea, or something stronger? Melbrass was offended by the suggestion that someone of her rank in the choir would ever consume something that would impair her predictions. Accepting the water, she waited for a meeting with the human leader. It wasn't a long wait, and soon she was being led into a large but modestly decorated office, where the human leader awaited her, alongside some other dignitaries. At least nobody in those rooms were armed, compared to all the guards she has seen throughout the buildings. Greetings, listener. I am Mayor Suresh Nidari, leader of the station. This is President Bhupinder Chantiari, leader of the nation of India, the parent state of this station. These fine people are President Jane Washington of the United States of America, President Lang Lim of Taiwan, Chancellor House Messerschmitt of the European Union, President Elena Vlachovich of the Russian Federation, Chairman Nubayu Haramdi of the Pan-African Coalition, and President Hamza El Salim, representative of the Middle Eastern Corporate States, and the Chairman Alejandro Miguel Azur of the South American League. The listener nodded and tried to remember the names as best she could, then giving up after the third person. Thank you. It is my great pleasure to finally meet you all. Although this is not the first time our people have met, it brings me great joy to greet you all as friends during peacetime rather than wartime. We couldn't agree more, said the mayor of the station. Now, we tried to sort out a schedule with your people, but they couldn't give us an exact timetable, so here's what we think is best, but please tell us if you disagree. We thought we'd start with some photographs outside, then some speeches, followed by some questions for the public if you like. Don't worry, we've screened out anything inappropriate. Melbrass was sure the human was showing off. Not only had they predicted what everyone would ask and invited only the correct people, they somehow spent whatever resources necessary to predict the entire time of her speech to make sure the day ran smoothly. This only made Melbrass more envious. As back as Isabella, she simply had been told exactly how long her speech should be. That sounds perfect. Let me know when you're ready to begin. Oh, in a few minutes. We've brought some gifts for you first, but before all that, what of your guards? I hope nobody was rude enough to not admit them. My guards? You know, other Zibellans, to make sure you're not harmed or anything. Melbrass struggled to understand the question. I haven't predicted anyone harming me on my trip. Why, have you? The humans all laughed. Oh, how she hated their laughter at the implication that her predictions were meaningless. She tried to foretell when the best time would be to approach them about perhaps helping her people with their prediction methods. Looking through the strands of fate, she found that right now had as good a chance as any. So she finally asked the question. So, how did you know? How did we know what? Asked the pale woman, who ruled over the northeastern quadrant. How did you know where exactly you needed to attack to defeat the Zuberians? In that exact combination, with the exact number of troops and munitions? The leaders all looked at each other in confusion. Listener, I don't think we understand the question. For a brief second, it almost looked like they were being genuine. If they needed her to embarrass herself by pointing out how much better the humans were at making predictions, before this would help, so be it. How did your seers know where to send your military? How did you know to prepare for this war for over 30 years? And what do we need to do to be half as good as you? What do you mean, seers? The dark-skinned woman from the northwestern continent asked. Melbrass decided to try a different approach. Could you, as if I were a mentally deficient child, walk me through the process by which you prepared for and won the war? The leader seemed shocked at this, almost as if they hadn't expected it. After a few moments, the heavy-set man from the region in the center of all the planetary maps spoke. Well, Your Holiness, we sent out probes into deep space, mining ships mostly, but some survey vessels. We found one of your ships, all souls lost. Managed to figure out how your FTL and your communication systems worked, and then sent a message. Yes, I understand that part. What I don't understand is how you knew where to look. We didn't. It was pure chance. So you're telling me you found that ship by accident? With no help from your seers or oracles? We don't have any of those. Come again? We don't have seers or oracles. Well, we have some people who claim to know the future, but they're just con artists. Some companies made some good predictive software that suggests future purchases to consumers, if that's what you mean. Ah, mechanical seers. We haven't gotten that far yet, but it's good to know we're going in the right direction. So how do they do it? They look at your past preferences and purchases and make guesses. Melbrass was stunned at the revelation. That's it? They just guess? Based on the past? Yes? So then, if that's the best you have, how did you know you needed such a large fleet to fight the Siberians? We didn't, replied the tan man. So then how, by the blessed name of the oracles, did you have such a large fleet? Because we just did. Why? This time, the dark-skinned woman was the first reply, in case we needed to defend ourselves. Before Melbrass could reply, the man representing the southeastern part of the world scoffed at her statement. Oh, please, Jane. We all know your military-industrial complex is just a job program by another name. Don't blame me. I got voted in as an independent. It's not my fault the Appropriations Committee are such chicken shits they succumb to Rayfron's threats about moving factories out of your home state, Mr. Congressman. We'd hate for you to be responsible for unemployment and for us to have to fund your opponent's election campaign. But hey, at least the guns ended up being useful for something. Before the politicians could continue bickering, Melbrass finally spoke again. So, let me make sure I understand this. Not only did you have no idea that you were going to fight a war at any point in the future, you simply spent untold amounts of resources amassing weapons, simply as a way to lower unemployment? No, of course not, replied the dark-skinned man, responsible for the central landmass. It was also a deterrent, as well as a massive dick-swinging contest. A deterrent against who? Screeched the listener. You weren't even aware that there were other races in the galaxy until you found that ship. The same man replied, as if the answer was obvious. Against each other, of course. But you weren't at war with each other. Exactly, because of the deterrence. How do you prevent war amongst your people? Melbrass finally understood. This wasn't a show of power by a superior civilization. This wasn't a grandiose reminder that Zibellians were inferior. These were just a bunch of primates without any way to concretely determine the future. The guards were armed just because something might happen. They were surprised she came along and unarmed because they had no idea if she would live or die on this trip. The reasons they allowed alcohol consumption was because they didn't have any foresight to lose. They played guessing games because they simply didn't know what was going to happen. They were a sad race of blind, paranoid, lost imbeciles. Imbeciles who, in their ignorance, by pure chance, managed to find her people, managed to reverse FTO in less than a galactic decade, and destroy the Ziberians. So how did you win the war? Pardon? The war! How did you win the war? How did you know where to send your fleets? What maneuvers to execute? Which plans would succeed? Experience. Against who? Each other? She couldn't believe it when everyone in the room nodded. At least some had the decency to look sheepish. Then why did you even name this station after an oracle? Now everyone in the room seemed puzzled. What do you mean? Delphi Station. It's named after the Oracle of Delphi, one of your seers. How can you claim she was a fraud when you name a station after her? This time it was the mayor of the station who spoke. The Temple of the Oracle was built on top of a pocket of gas. She would inhale the vapors and experience drug-addled visions, and then people back then would take these seriously. So why name the station after her? It's not. There must be some issue with your translators, listener. It is named Delhi Station, not Delphi Station. It is named to remember the city of Delhi. Why? Because it got destroyed in the terrorist plot by fanatics, using a series of nuclear weapons. We wish we were seers and oracles, so we could have prevented it from happening. We didn't. So now we look to the future so it doesn't happen again. Melbrass finally understood why the station has so many point defense turrets. Why these people had amassed such armaments of devastation. Why, unlike her people who only prepared for war when they foretold it, the humans were always ready to kill millions at a moment's notice. She finally understood the letters carved above the door leading into the office. It is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.